Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Hampshire Audubon's fiscal 20 year annual meeting. I'm very happy to see many of you again. I wish we could be doing this in person. I want to thank Mark Nutter and Hope Jordan for helping us with the technology. And we will get through this meeting as best we can in a way that's new for all of us. As in everything right now, we're innovating as best we can and learning how to do things remotely. Believe me, I wish we could see you in person, and we'll do that again a year from now. Welcome to our annual meeting. I want to thank the board of directors who are with us today. Those people include David Donsker, Dave Howe, Tom Lee, Susan Goodwin, Chris Picat, Charlie Nims, Melissa Smart, Paul Dosher, Catherine Eames, Michael Amaral, and Sue Martin. It's wonderful to have our board of directors joining us. I also want to say thank you for joining us to the staff who are on this call and who led the breakout rooms: Hope Jordan, Mark Nutter, Jane Coleus, Amy Dennis, Chris Martin, Carol Foss, Phil Brown, Craig Holmes, Pam Hunt, Becky Swamala, Diana Smith, and Diane DeLuca. Thanks to our wonderful staff who are joining us today. And there are others who aren't on the call, but thanks to them. Really important that we thank our sponsors for this meeting. We couldn't do it without them. Normando Associates, they have sponsored our annual meeting for many years in a row now, as well as Chippers, who's also been a wonderful supporter of our work. So thanks to our sponsors. News, brand new news. Our silent auction is live until 6 p.m. tonight, not 4 p.m. as you may have read. We're keeping it going for 2 more hours. And so far, we are at 81% of our goal for our silent auction. So go bid on those exciting, amazing things that you can win for our silent auction. We've raised over $3,200 so far in that silent auction. We're trying to get to $4,000 by 6 p.m. Don't leave this meeting. Go bid after this meeting. You have till 6 p.m. All right. So again, thank you very much for all your attendance and your attention. And this meeting will basically be me talking, and we'll do some interactive stuff with me leading our business meeting. I'll be giving a president's address, briefly going through our finances, and then a very exciting and important part of our annual meeting every year is presenting yearly awards where we recognize important people. And then we're so lucky today to have John Elder from Middlebury College to talk to us as our keynote speaker. And we'll introduce John later in the meeting. And John is on the Zoom here. So thank you all so much. All right, I'd like to shift to the business meeting portion of our annual meeting, which, as you know, is a requirement for nonprofits. We have a couple of business items we must get through, and we'll go through those quickly. The business meeting agenda was sent to everyone on this call. And if you want to refer to that document again is the business meeting agenda. First, I want to officially call to order the fiscal year 2020 New Hampshire Audubon annual meeting. We're meeting today on September 19th. Our first order of business is to vote. The membership on this call votes on the approval of the minutes from our 2019 annual meeting, which happened a year ago at Camp Pasquaney in Hebron, New Hampshire. So right now I cannot see you, but I know you can see me and hear me. But I would like to ask for a motion from the audience to approve the 2019 annual meeting minutes.
So moved. Tom Lee.
Tom Lee moves. Do we have a second?
Second, Michael Amaral.
Michael Amaral seconds. I have two issues of discussion. We've got some spelling corrections for people's names, which I will work with David Howe, our secretary, on after this meeting. Are there any other comments on the 2019 annual meeting minutes? Hearing none, I would like to ask the membership on this call to approve the minutes in a second. Either, I would like people to give a thumbs up. All those in favor of accepting the annual meeting minutes, give me a thumbs up. I'm counting on some of our friends here on the meeting to scroll through to see what the thumbs up look like. Okay, all those opposed, thumbs down. All right, do we have any opposed? 0. All right, the minutes pass. Thank you very much for that order of business. The second order of business is we are bringing on 4 board members for a 3-year term at this annual meeting. And in a second, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the full slate of trustees to start a 3-year term as of today. And those people are Paul Nickerson, who lives in Hudson, New Hampshire. He's a current trustee. He is starting a second 3-year term. Melissa Smart from Kentucky, New Hampshire is also starting a second 3-year term. Catherine Eames from Newcastle was voted onto the board in March. We officially need to vote her in for the start of a 3-year term as of today. And then Susan Goodwin is joining the board for her first 3-year term as the representative from the Loon Preservation Committee's board of directors. We have a representative on the LPC's board, and they provide, Loon Preservation Committee provides a board member to join our board, and that's Susan Goodwin. I would like to invite a motion to accept the full slate of officers to start a 3-year term as of today. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Donna, do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Marie Nickerson, thank you. All those in favor, thumbs up. Lots of thumbs, good.
Thumbs up.
Any opposed? Oops. Okay, thank you. The motion passes. Thank you very much, everyone. Finally, I would like to have Mark help me with the PowerPoint. I will do a very brief financial report from fiscal year 20. Fiscal year 20 started April 1st, 2019 and ended March 31st, 2020. Our income, as you see here, totaled $1.7 million during that time frame. As you can see, these numbers have not yet been audited. Because of COVID-19, our audit has been delayed, and this is in collaboration with our audit firm. And usually our audit would happen in June. So our audited financials will be presented to our membership at a later date, but this is the summary of our audited, pre-audited final numbers for fiscal year 20. This was also sent to you in our package with more detail, and so I'm going to quickly just go through these. The major thing I want to point out in the income side is that board funds, the red section of that pie chart, means funds that the board approved to release from a board restricted fund as income. Our gifts, grants, and contracts, our program income, and our net assets released from restrictions all account for approximately 20 to 25% of our income. As you can see, membership is about 6%. Other income, you might wonder what that is. When we do any sort of timber management for ecological management or habitat management, timber management income is generally in other. Next slide. On the expense side, again, these are categories that will go into our audit. About 12% of our expense, 12% of expense supports our development team, 10% supports administration, About 22% supports our conservation, advocacy, and sanctuaries. In other words, some of our program staff, and about over half of our expense, again, is program staff and salaries and other expenses. If I have any questions on these numbers and the information that was sent out to the membership, I would invite you to send an email or give me a call, send me an email, or send a note to Joe Constantino, our Director of Finance, who developed these numbers in summary. And I want to thank Joe for pulling these numbers together pre-audit for this meeting. All right, I'm going to move on. Thank you all for your attention. I hereby close the business meeting portion of the annual meeting. I don't know if I need a vote to adjourn this portion of the meeting, but let's see. Let's make sure we take care of this. And again, I'm not a Robert's Rules expert. I need a motion to adjourn the business meeting.
I'll make a motion.
Donna, thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second, Charlie Nims. So give me a thumbs up to adjourn. All right. Anyone thumbs down? I'm happy to adjourn the business portion of this annual meeting. Thank you all. All right, moving on. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about New Hampshire Audubon in the fiscal year 2020. In 2020, our programs continued to deliver Audubon's work and mission to the public in ways that were innovative, relevant, and interdisciplinary. Our staff, board, and governance and fundraising teams are all healthy and improving in measurable and new ways. And our communications and impact is reaching more people and larger audiences than ever before. We currently enjoy more than 14,000 people who are watching our communications channels in this past year. That's an increase from 10,000 or so in the previous year.
Wow.
The work and value of our volunteers continues to be astounding and the envy of any nonprofit in New Hampshire and nationally. This year, the value of our thousands of hours of volunteer work is valued at over $312,000 to the organization. And that's based on the national hourly rate of volunteer value. I feel like the fiscal year 2020 was a turning point for the growth and for a better future for New Hampshire Audubon. Next slide. Okay, this graphic shows a few of the numbers that we compile every year at New Hampshire Audubon based on our work. Some of these numbers are just astounding to me. For example, we run a program where we record all the eBird bird observations a year. And this year, we have recorded over 400,000 bird observations in fiscal year 20. That is an incredible citizen science program run by Becky Swamla and is one of the best, if not the best, citizen science outputs of data in the state. I think we should be very proud of some of these numbers. The numbers here also document how many species observations we have for some of our rare species, some of our members, the number of our members. And this document will be distributed to our membership very soon. Usually you see this in our annual report version of our newsletter. And I want to just tell you that, that in summary, the breakout rooms that some of you were in are great examples among many of why New Hampshire is leading in what we do. And the leadership we provide to the environmental community, our partners, and the impact we have on behalf of our state's wildlife and habitats is exemplary. Next slide. We are nearly at the point of releasing a new State of the Birds report, which some of you heard about in the State of the Birds breakout. This will be the first time we've released this report in about 10 years. And it's a status report of our birds organized by major habitat types in the state. And it's this kind of applied science, real science, that guides conservation decisions statewide and region-wide, and is also a template of the best kind of applied science that our partners and we use to make decisions. Next slide. We also are enjoying being the leader in the New England region and the Northeast, advancing what we call the MODIS project, which you may have heard Carol Foss talk about if you were in her breakout room. These dots on this map show potential locations where we will have receiving stations where we can watch in real time as migrating species move through this network of receiving stations. We will be able to identify brand new conservation targets, areas for conservation, and be able to understand migration pathways of birds, butterflies, and other species in ways that are brand new. And New Hampshire Audubon just received a major grant from the federal government to be the lead agency working with 4 other partners to develop this migratory pathway project. We should be very proud of our leadership there. Next slide. In addition to the raptors that Chris Martin talked about today, the northern harriers, we're also leading a brand new project by using our peregrine falcon camera on the Brady Sullivan Tower in Manchester to bring that kind of information to children in the 5th grade in Hooksett. And this is a fairly new project for us that we're expanding in the future. And it's a great example of how we are now using our real-time science to teach children about wildlife ecology and to teach them how to be scientists. This project is also a great example of how our science team and our education team are working together in new ways to teach children about the natural world. Next slide. These are the peregrine falcons, I believe, that are from the Brady Sullivan Tower. And this is the kind of behavior that the children will be seeing and recording as they learn how to observe these species in real time. Next slide. At our McLean Center headquarters in Concord, this is the first year that we've had a spring bloom of our completely redesigned pollinator demonstration garden. Our pollinator garden project here at our headquarters is an example of how others on their property can provide native habitat for the insects that birds need to feed their young and to improve the livelihoods, so to speak, and the success of nesting birds. We will take the learning from this project and implement a pollinator meadow restoration project. So this is a garden. We'll be working on a meadow restoration project this coming spring. And we have plans to expand this kind of learning to develop pollinator gardens and native habitat in our urban areas. This is another example of how our land team, our science team, and our education team are working together to not only benefit pollinator insects and the birds that need them and eat them, but also for how we're providing places for people to enjoy and learn how to do this kind of work on their own property. Next slide. And as a sort of a benefit, not a benefit, I'm sorry, as a result of COVID-19, we are also learning how to take this learning and create virtual tours through videos and online interactive sessions so that if people can't leave their homes or if they can't visit McLean Center, we are developing new video tours of these kinds of pollinator locations so that people can see them from their computer screen. Next slide. These are all examples of New Hampshire Audubon's commitment to valuing connections. Everything we do is about connecting people to nature, connecting people to people, and making sure wildlife and birds are connected to and supported by healthy habitats. There has never been a time with the stark reminders of today of how small our world really is. For one, the pandemic has reminded us how precious being connected is. and how hard it is to be separated. When we see each other these days, it is not generally person to person, and we have learned to live with distance, being unconnected, and being disconnected. We have also seen recently how natural systems remain connected and active, and sometimes fierce. This week here in New Hampshire, we watched a plume of smoke spread over us from the western wildfires, and we watched hurricane flooding spread up the East Coast. Climate change may be shrinking our world in a way where we all experience the impacts of natural phenomena from thousands of miles away. However, and finally, let's remember that nature is what binds us together. The more we learn about nature, the more we will protect nature. And everything Audubon is doing, we're doing it for that purpose. And being outside, learning about our natural world, and going hiking and birding is more important than ever. Next slide. I hope you will all continue to help New Hampshire Audubon protect what we all love. And that's why we're all here together. And I feel like we are connected today, even though we're not in person. But we will see each other in person again soon. Despite our current challenges, please remember, it is these things that unite us. Thanks. All right, everybody. That was my president's address for New Hampshire Audubon for this year. We're going to move into the next portion of our annual meeting, and that is the annual awards. And I have the honor and privilege to be the first person to present this year's President's Award for New Hampshire Audubon. The President's Award from New Hampshire Audubon is traditionally given to a person or persons who have supported the organization in an extraordinary fashion. The first President Award in 2008 was awarded to staff of New Hampshire Audubon. This year, I am going to honor a group of people who need recognition now, during this time of extraordinary challenge. In recent months, our staff have worked heroically to innovate, take on new challenges, and to a person, work harder and smarter during this pandemic. Every one of our staff, from someone we hired last month to someone who has been with New Hampshire Audubon for 4 decades, has faced new and seemingly insurmountable challenges to improve and advance our work. Because of their belief in our mission and their exemplary performance in the most difficult of circumstances, it is my pleasure to read you the names of the President Award winners for 2020, New Hampshire Audubon staff. Next slide. Becky Spinney, our accountant. Next. Chris Martin, senior biologist for raptors. Becky Swamala, senior biologist and citizen science bird data project leader. Kelly Dwyer, urban wildlife education lead. Carol Foss, senior advisor for science and policy. Craig Holmes, McLean Center coordinator. Diane DeLuca, senior biologist for phenology and pollinators. Pam Hunt. Oh, there's a funny picture of our Twitchers. Next, Pam Hunt, senior biologist for avian conservation, here receiving an award from National Wildlife Federation. Next, Diana Smith, director of communications. Next. Here's a group of us skating on a pond at McLean Center in the field. Next. Oh, and there's our Halloween costume gang at Halloween last year. Next. Hope Jordan, Director of Membership and Development. Jane Coleus, Membership Coordinator. Joe, there's Jane and Vanessa Johnson. Joe Constantino, Director of Finance. Jonathan Solman, Massabesic Center Director. Lauren Kramer, Events Manager. Mark Nutter, seen here with Judy Spigarelli, Mark Nutter, Grants Manager. Phil Brown, Director of Land Management. Rick Matthews, oh, sorry, there's Phil and Vanessa out in our field, or out in our parking lot. And here's Chris Martin and Vanessa when they got a paper published in a scientific journal. Rick Matthews, Buildings Facilities Manager. Vanessa Johnson, Modus Project GIS Manager, here with Jane Coleus. Shelby Bernier, Education Coordinator and Summer Camp Director. Next, and then not pictured today, Amy Dennis, Human Resource Coordinator, Adam Blankenbricker, Seasonal Paradise Point Center Director, Christian Robinson, Seasonal Paradise Point Center Naturalist, Amanda Clem, Animal Care Specialist, and Michelle Varga, Nature Store Manager. Thank you for your attention, and thank you to the winners of the President's Award for 2020. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Doug. And the next part is going to be the pre-recorded awards for the volunteers.
Every year since 1983, New Hampshire Audubon has presented the Tudor Richards Award to individual, unindividual, or individuals to honor their tireless and effective work for conservation in New Hampshire. This year, we honor Bruce and Sarah Schwegler. And for Bruce, it's a posthumous award. The state of New Hampshire and the world beyond really lost a great humanitarian. And for very active in the nonprofit world. Bruce's work is familiar to many. His work for conservation groups in the state is well known, from the Upper Valley Land Trust to the New Hampshire Council of Wetlands. New Hampshire Audubon was one of many beneficiaries of his work through his long-term board leadership and governance. Sarah's love of field botany, the wild world of plants, led to an eagerness to inspire her love in others, leading field trips, volunteering for the New England Wildflower Society, compiling a plant inventory for Orford, their hometown. And it was Sarah's love for field botany that infused Bruce's more traditional approach to land stewardship, which was timber management. And so what goes on in the understory? What goes on in meadows, wild meadows, and the rich soils of their upper valley? Plants and their pollinators, wildlife. And then the big question, how to be great stewards of that wild world. Biodiversity. Bruce was soon, they enlisted the help of cooperative extension wildlife biologists, and very hands-on Bruce was soon on his mower, maintaining meadow and early successional wildlife habitat, so important to biodiversity. Over the years, they hosted field trips open to the public, hosted Coverts Cooperators workshops. Bruce was, I think, a graduate of the very first workshop that the Coverts program put on. Cooperative extension outings, and gradually, as a legacy to future generations, the Schweglers created a sanctuary and botany trail on their land, permanently conserved. Both Bruce and Sarah have a real concern about field botany disappearing from academic curricula, and so a botany field trip was has been their creation. They've supported each other's complementary passions and abilities, created a strong partnership that benefited New Hampshire greatly, as well as New Hampshire Audubon, and that will continue to do so, adding their names to couples who have received the Tudor Richards Award: Fred and Betty Steele, Anne and Roger Sweet, will bring a smile of recognition and appreciation to many people, past, present, and future. And it is with great pleasure, and some nervousness, obviously, that on behalf of New Hampshire Audubon, I present the Tudor Richards 2020 Award to Bruce and Sarah Schwegler. And Sarah, it's gorgeous, it's very polished,
It certainly is.
and it has wonderful words on it. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Francie. All the words that I've been talking to myself about are disappearing. This is such a great honor, and my only wish or disappointment is that Bruce isn't here right behind me to accept it with me. It's a great honor. We knew Tudor, and certainly he did so very much for Audubon from the very beginning to the very end, and it's a pleasure to be honored in this way.
Tudor, I'll just add, Tudor would approve.
Well, he really got New Hampshire Audubon going and started. I'll just tell a little story about Bruce. Someone asked him in rather recent years, what was his favorite pastime? And he paused a little and he said, I think governance of, what do I want to say,
Nonprofit governance.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Nonprofit governance is what I enjoy most. And I thought that it was absolutely true and absolutely telling of what he liked to spend his time on. He really enjoyed people and working with people and trying to get them going in a way that would be useful to the organization that they were with. I wish I had my notes with me. Anyway, I'll just say two things that I thought of. For me, Francie talked about my association with wildflowers, which has absolutely changed my life and been my passion. On the other hand, birds have been a secondary passion, and we have been so fortunate in living in New Hampshire. The first place we lived in Wentworth, we had a whippoorwill at night. And oh my gosh, the days listening to that whippoorwill were just thrilling. That was a second home for us. And when we'd come and hear that whippoorwill, oh, it was just great. We live somewhere else now on the shores of back a little bit from the shores of a small lake, a pond, that has a loon on it. Well, if that doesn't set us up for, oh, when do you think the ice will go out, and when will the loon come out? One year it was one day after the ice went out. But we have a pair of loons out there this year and with a baby chick. So that is just great. I give a lot of credit over our 34 years in New Hampshire to Audubon for many, many things, but one of them being my interest in birds and watching them. I think you can be a botanist and a birder at the same time. Maybe one you know a little more about, but absolutely you can love them both. So it's with that that I accept this for Bruce and for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the whole point is thank you.
Thank you very much.
The Goodhue Elkins Award is given annually by New Hampshire Audubon to recognize an individual who has made outstanding contributions to the study of New Hampshire birds. This award is named for Charles Goodhue, more on him later, one of the first great birders, and Kimball Elkins, who remains the model for critical observation and insightful record keeping. As a neighbor, friend, and field companion, I am very proud to be the presenter of this award to Betsy Janeway for her decades of selfless service. She has been an energetic and effective volunteer in the areas of bird study and conservation in New Hampshire for over 40 years. She has volunteered for numerous projects, including the State Endangered Species Program, especially during its early years when she did extensive field work on northern harriers, bald eagles, and ospreys. She was especially noticeable during both the unique Harrier Days and Osprey Observation Weekends. She also has worked on bald eagle surveys in the winter, the statewide wetland surveys, whippoorwill surveys, birdathons, and has participated in local Christmas bird counts and volunteered on many other bird work projects. Additionally, she has compiled and edited over 40 years and counting of bird data for the town of Webster, and she has contributed her bird data, for over 30 years to New Hampshire Bird Records. Not only did she work diligently on the 6-year field project known as the Breeding Bird Atlas, but she also authored 14 of the species accounts. All of these efforts total hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of volunteer work. After moving to New Hampshire with her family in the 1970s, she almost immediately became active as a volunteer for New Hampshire Audubon. Besides all of her field work that I've already mentioned, she had the energy and time to serve on the New Hampshire Board of Trustees, including being chair for several years. During this time, she worked tirelessly to support the organization and its policies to protect birds and other wildlife. Besides countless hours in meetings, she also testified at the State House on behalf of key wildlife and conservation bills, often a daunting task. Less well known are her contributions well beyond New Hampshire Audubon. For decades, she has been a leader in many ways for the venerable Concord Bird and Wildflower Club, which, by the way, is even older than New Hampshire Audubon. She has also been the moving force behind wildlife conservation and education in the town of Webster, serving as the chair of the Conservation Commission for many years. She even created a splendid 70-page book on the roadside wetlands of Webster, including aerial photos that she took herself. Betsy's first choice has always been to be in the field, and she has hiked and kayaked and camped from Webster to Lake Umbagog, all in the service of birds New Hampshire Audubon, and the wildlife of New Hampshire. Not only does Betsy epitomize what it means to be a volunteer for New Hampshire Audubon and the larger wildlife community, but she also shares a special connection to Charles Goodhue, one of the namesakes of the award. Her many years of service and love of birds has been based in Goodhue's hometown, Webster, New Hampshire. Therefore, it is most appropriate and with great honor that we present the 2020 Goodhue Elkins Award to Betsy Janeway.
I'm Phil Brown, Director of Land Management at New Hampshire Audubon. Today, I'm presenting the H. Mead Caddo Award for Land Conservation to David White of Sandwich, New Hampshire. Mead Caddo is the now retired first director of the Harris Center for Conservation Education, a regional land trust based in Hancock. Mead established many partnerships to connect and conserve large blocks of unfragmented land. This award is presented to individuals who have made significant contributions to New Hampshire Audubon's work through land protection partnerships. Ever since I met David on my very first visit to the Alice Bemis Thompson Wildlife Sanctuary in 2004, I've been learning from him and the example he lives by. David is a tracker, a homesteader, and an exceptionally skilled woodsman. David was and still is an eager sanctuary steward and a key volunteer in helping maintain the trails and boundaries at the sanctuary. In his early 60s, when we first met, I immediately realized that I couldn't keep up with him on snowshoes. All these years later, I still doubt I could. David's land protection interests date back to 1987 with his work with the then Damariscotta River Association. About a decade later, David and his wife Cece, an accomplished land conservationist in her own right, purchased their homestead land abutting the Thompson Sanctuary. David and Cece's vision started small in 1998 with an effort to map their local sub-watershed, which runs right through the heart of the sanctuary. After building their off-grid house deep in the woods, David's efforts to conserve more land within the watershed picked up. I was often guided by David's hand-drawn and color-coded property maps. He always had the latest scoop on which neighbors were in the market for selling, considering subdividing, or generally interested in land protection. With approvals, but sometimes minimal guidance from New Hampshire Audubon, he was successful through numerous conversations with his neighbors and area landowners in helping Audubon acquire and fundraise for two key parcels, 41 acres in 2006 and 24 in 2011. These parcels buffered the prime wetland containing Atwood Brook and expanded an area of considerable importance to wildlife. Maybe because of his deep base of knowledge of the natural world, his interpersonal skills, his cool head, and his steady voice, David has had considerable success in his dealings with numerous landowners over the years. This work isn't easy, and land protection and land is very personal to many people, so it takes a special kind of person. Other conservation groups instantly recognize this too. In fact, David's contributions to the conservation legacy of Sandwich and the region go well beyond his volunteer work for Audubon. His mapping and contacts helped set the groundwork for the vision of a conservation corridor connecting the White Mountains to the Ossipes. The Thompson Sanctuary lies squarely in the middle. As David knows as a skilled tracker, and Mead would fully appreciate, the region is very important to wide-ranging mammals like black bear, moose, bobcat, and potentially even northern mammals like Canada lynx and American marten. David has worked closely with the Lakes Region Conservation Trust, serving on its board and lands committee for many years. Through his roles and additional local and regional land protection partnerships, David has helped broker the protection of 10 properties for a total of 1,165 acres in the towns of Sandwich and Tamworth, an impressive legacy. And this doesn't include his own property, 110 acres of which he and Cece placed under conservation easement with LRCT, and 41 of which they donated in fee. David truly walks the walk. As a homesteader, David's work is never done. There's always something more, and one rarely gets ahead. Land conservation is the same way, and David's approach to it is similar. In 2014, his work with land protection partner, the Northeast Wilderness Trust, led New Hampshire Audubon to place a Forever Wild conservation easement on the entirety of the Thompson Sanctuary, now, thanks to David's work, at 300 acres in size. This action will ensure that this important place to wildlife and people will remain to be guided by the natural processes. Further, David and Cece, as well as other conservation partners, allow foot access to the sanctuary along a portion of their driveway and woods trail so the public can experience wilderness. David is currently working with conservation partners around Red Hill and Moultonborough and Sandwich, and 8 landowners who hold over 1,000 acres collectively. This is a major regional land conservation priority, and just one of the focus areas David helped to identify during his work on the Lakes Region Strategic Conservation Plan. This plan has set the groundwork for the next generation of land conservationists to protect the most resilient landscapes in the face of climate change, which David is actively trying to combat. It is my great honor to present the Mead Caddo Award to David White.
Phil, thank you. I am pleasantly surprised to receive this recognition from New Hampshire Audubon, and certainly honored to take my place alongside exemplary predecessors, Francie von Mertens and Mead Caddo. In the course of my 33 years of volunteer work, primarily in the area of permanent land conservation, I have collaborated with 9 land trusts and conservation organizations, at least. I've had formal working roles with 4 of those organizations, the most recent of which has been Lakes Region Conservation Trust. You are the first to acknowledge my contributions with an award, and I'm gratified to know that you have valued my collaboration and partnership so highly. I appreciate the strength of partnerships, and I have always placed getting conservation done above consideration of who should do it. My concept of conservation is very broad, not limited to land conservation per se. Conservation of the earth and all its species and diversity has been a core value for many years in the way my wife and I conduct our daily lives. On our homestead, we generate nearly all of our energy. We conserve, compost, and recycle virtually all that is possible. And we make a strong effort to limit our consumption based on our best understanding of the consequences of our choices. My personal worldview informs my work as a conservation volunteer. While I personally have enjoyed numerous conservation successes over the years, and while the conservation movement as a whole has had substantial victories, the sad truth is that collectively we are losing the battle. The evidence is pretty clear. The planet is on the verge of climate catastrophe. The terrifying loss of species is just awful. And human numbers have overpowered the Earth's resilience. I don't mean to end my remarks on a pessimistic note. Rather, I want to share a perspective with you that I believe is essential if we collectively and the Earth are to realize the benefit of our conservation efforts. Healing ourselves and healing the planet are one and the same. I'm going to repeat that. Healing ourselves and healing the planet are one and the same thing. Healing in this context encompasses healing all aspects of our relationship with the earth. When we have examined this sincerely and honestly and made appropriate and necessary changes, the planet will respond with gratitude, and our work as conservationists will be made easier. Thank you.
The John Thalheimer Volunteer Award has been presented annually since 1997. This award is dedicated to the first recipient, John Thalheimer, a volunteer whose outstanding service to New Hampshire Audubon both strengthened the organization and is an inspiring example to others. For this award, New Hampshire Audubon staff nominates volunteers that go above and beyond what's expected. This year's award winner is Jack Dorsey of Campton. Jack is a retired school teacher and a retired rock climber and distance runner. After he gave up those activities, he got into paddling and wildlife photography. He started sending photos to us in May 2013 when he found an eagle in the lakes region that was being harassed by 2 eastern kingbirds. Over the next 7.5 years, Jack has been a raptor monitoring volunteer for the Conservation Department. With kayak and camera, Jack is focused mostly on bald eagles, but he's also documented ospreys, loons, and other birds and animals. Taking notes with his camera, Jack has gathered information on bald eagle nests year-round. He's also generously donated many of his best images to all of us, free of charge, for use in education, communications, and development activities. Jack's unique set of talents, his curiosity about the natural world, his willingness to go just about anywhere, his ignoring helicopters, his ability to strike up conversations with just about anybody, has enabled him to glean additional leads on potential nests all around the state. His physical stamina and photographic talent, plus the fact that he's got lots of time to be outside, has combined to create a near-ideal volunteer. At one level, Jack's photos are really a good source of biological data, but in addition, his images are quite simply stunning. Over the years, he's shared with us literally hundreds of amazing pictures from his visits to more than 30 bald eagle nest sites, ranging from Littleton to Lisbon in the North Country, to Hebron and Ossipee in the Lakes region, to Dover and Hampton at the seacoast. Besides use in Conservation Department publications, his photos have found their way into New Hampshire Audubon's e-news, Facebook, as mastheads on our annual fund appeals. Others have ended up enhancing New Hampshire Fish and Game's publications and various media releases about raptors. Jack's modest, soft-spoken, and he's a delight to supervise. He's dedicated, for example, in the spring of 2016, cataract surgery on both his eyes kept him sidelined for just 2 weeks. Through sharing his photographs, Jack has made an important in-kind contribution to New Hampshire Audubon. For that, we're very, very grateful. I couldn't be more pleased to present this award, the John Thalheimer 2020 Award, to Jack Dorsey. Come on out. Congratulations. Fist bump, or elbow bump.
Thank you.
Take your mask off now.
Can you take your vest off now?
Oh, like so? Okay. I'm really pleased. It's been very good for me to be part of New Hampshire Audubon Society over these years. A number of people, Chris, Libby Corbin, and a woman, Faye Lowry, were all really big parts of the, of my work this year. It's been a little bit of a difficult year in the sense that I ended up with AFib this year. So what was happening is I also take pictures of like my grandchildren while they're running races and things like that. And so one of the things that I was doing was running along with these young kids and then sprinting to spots where I could take pictures of them and so forth. Unfortunately, it ended up being quite painful for me. And so it was a little bit of a hard year. but it turned out really good. And I appreciate the time you guys spent with me. So, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Here it's Doug back with you all. We weren't sure that if Betsy Janeway could join us today or not. So she asked me, or I guess she gave me permission to read this short acceptance statement for her award that we saw Bob Quinn present earlier. Betsy agreed to let me share some of her stories about birding in New Hampshire. She was so excited when she first visited New Hampshire Audubon in the 70s to find that there were other adults who loved birds. Soon thereafter, she was off climbing mountains, camping on the trails, visiting her New Hampshire Bird Atlas site in Henniker, and always recording and sharing information about birds with New Hampshire Audubon. She fondly remembers birding with sweetheart Kimball Elkins on a day when they were looking for ducks. She is so proud to introduce herself as a published author to many audiences. The bad news, she would continue, is that my book is the New Hampshire Bird Atlas. Betsy wanted me to make sure you know that she is thrilled to receive the Goodhue Elkins Award this year, and she looks forward to many more days watching birds in and around her local Webster habitats. And I believe that concludes New Hampshire Audubon's awards for 2020. Congratulations to all the award winners. You all are so deserving. You've done so much for New Hampshire Audubon. You've done so much for conservation and wildlife and birds, and we thank you so much. Okay, everyone, I'm going to shift to something that I'm so excited about, and that's to hear from John Elder. And I'll introduce John and then turn over the presentation to him. In 1973, after receiving his doctorate in English from Yale, John Elder took a position on the faculty of Middlebury College. Over the next 37 years, he taught both in the undergraduate college and, during summers, at the Breadloaf School of English and the Breadloaf Writers Conference. With his strong interests in contemporary poetry of nature, American nature writing, and Japan's haiku tradition, he eventually went from teaching full-time in the English department to a split appointment with environmental studies. In his final years at Middlebury, he was named a non-departmental college professor. This allowed him, in addition to his courses in literature and writing, also to teach a number of service learning courses in the adjacent towns and farms of Addison County, Vermont. John has published widely. His 4 most recent books weave together discussion of poetry, descriptions of the northern New England landscapes, and memoir. With Robert Finch, he co-edited the Norton Book of Nature Writing. He has been awarded NEH, Fulbright, and Guggenheim fellowships. Current writing projects include essays on Thoreau's flute playing and on Robert Frost's ecological insights. John and his wife, Rita, live in the Green Mountain village of Bristol and run a sugaring operation in the hills of nearby Starksboro with the families of their sons. It's my pleasure to introduce today's and our fiscal year 20 annual meeting's keynote speaker, John Elder.
Thanks. Shall I begin? Good.
Please do.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure if I was on the screen. Let me know if this is not taking for any reason, but I'll just keep going. So it's really a pleasure to participate in this afternoon's annual meeting for New Hampshire Audubon. I'm impressed by your effectiveness and ingenuity in doing this all on Zoom. It's working very well, I think. And I also am very appreciative of your mission and how you contribute to the natural and human environment of your region, our region, in so many ways. I'd also like to thank both Doug and Hope for helping me to brainstorm a good topic for today's talk. My topic will be the ecological insights in the poetry of Robert Frost. And there are a couple of reasons this seemed good for your group. One is, in fact, that Frost was both a great influence on 20th century American literature and also a person almost all of whose poems are focused on northern New England, specifically on New Hampshire and Vermont, and both of which he owned farms and where he spent most of his writing career. I think that when we live in a place that has had a great artist, for instance, if you live in northern New Mexico and look at the paintings of Georgia O'Keeffe, or if you live in northern New England and read the poetry of Robert Frost, it's truly a gift. These artists help us both to perceive more clearly and to feel more deeply the nature and value of our home places. And Frost has made such a contribution to me. I'm so grateful to live within his zone. The second reason that Frost seemed important to talk about today, or like a good choice, is that in fact he was a highly knowledgeable naturalist. I would argue that in order to find a poet in English and American literature equivalent to Frost's naturalist acumen, one would have to go all the way back to Shakespeare, that Warwickshire lad who constantly named the names of the flowers he saw and put them in the right order and in the right season and connected them to the succession of trees and to the animals passing through. Wordsworth, another poet I love, the central figure of English Romanticism, took nature to be a kind of arena for memory within which he could encounter the wholeness of his life with reference to natural associations. But Frost was a namer of names. He knew the names of things. He knew the patterns of relationship. He was a naturalist grounded in appreciation of Darwin's natural selection. He was an ace botanist who, even as an old man who, I hate to tell you, spent his summers in Florida, carried his little guide to New England flowers with him wherever he went. And he was also knowledgeable, and I'll come back around to this, about the geological history, the immediate geological history of our region. Every day of his life, he went out first thing in the morning to see what had been happening, what was blooming, what birds were passing through, what was happening at the edge between one environment and the next. Like Thoreau, he referred to this as doing his morning work. It was a stabilizing factor for Frost as a person who needed some stabilizing. Now, when you talk about Frost as a nature poet, it's possible to assume that means a kind of effusive or rhapsodic lover of natural beauty. He loved nature, but he was no sentimentalist. My father, who was a Baptist minister, used to like to say that sentimentality was loving something more than God did. And that always makes me laugh. It makes me laugh still. Frost loved nothing more than the larger sequence of succession and relationship in nature. It helped him to understand what to make of his own life. Now, in my talk, I've got about 25 minutes to talk about Frost and to share a few impressions about his naturalist skill. Then we'll have about 15 minutes for discussion. So I'll really zoom right along, but I hope I'll raise some points that you'd like to talk about, because I always love the fruition of conversation that comes when we have comments and questions. I'm going to look at two poems. The first one is a long, complicated poem called Directive. It was published in Frost's 1947 collection, Steeplebush. It had 62 lines, one of his most complex poems. I'll just look at the opening because I think that Directive could be called the best compact landscape history of New England. It brings out the several main dynamics that make our region feel the way it does. So let me read the first 17 lines of this poem and then share with you that broad landscape view, and then we'll dig down into one lyrical poem that shows Frost at work as an ecological poet. So here's how directive begins. Back out of all this now too much for us, back in a time made simple by the loss of detail, burned, dissolved, and broken off like graveyard marble sculpture in the weather, there is a house that is no more a house upon a farm that is no more a farm, and in a town that is no more a town. The road there, if you let a guide direct you who only has at heart you're getting lost, may seem as if it should have been a quarry. Great monolithic knees the former town long since gave up pretense of keeping covered, and there's a story in a book about it. Besides the wear of iron wagon wheels, the ledges show lines ruled southeast-northwest, the chisel work of an enormous glacier that braced his feet against the Arctic pole. I'll stop there because I want to make 3 points about Frost's landscape history of Vermont, and then we'll move on. The first one is that people from outside northern New England, coming from one of the metropolitan areas that ring us within much of the population of North America, tend often to see this as a kind of vestige of an early 19th century pre-industrial America, a kind of refuge from the walls, or you might say the malls that are closing in on them. But in fact, that's not the history of our place. These woods around us were all cut. In fact, they were clear cut twice in much of New England and much of New Hampshire and also of Vermont. And after the first cutting, they were farmed. Hill farms covered the heights. In fact, it was the farmers who cut down the trees, not just to clear spaces for their fields, but in order to get cash crops, charcoal for the early iron industry, potash to sell to the English industries. But they lost those farms. Most of the hill farms were out of business within 2 generations for reasons to which I'll return. So from Frost's vision, this is a place not that was never touched by history, but in which humanity erased the forests, and then the forests overcame the signs of the first human inhabitation. That's the landscape of the early Vermont hill farms. I love that line, back in a time made simple by a loss of detail. You know, it's easy to sentimentalize, to disproportionately value this landscape if we don't know the details. And his image there, graveyard marble sculpture in the weather. If you walk around where there were once towns, you'll find these little pocket graveyards with the old stone headstones leaning together, and the inscriptions are often blurry. All that weather, all that acid rain, we've gotten past that to some extent. But if you pay attention and you sort of look at them closely, you'll notice in how many years the children of a farm community were taken off by the influenza, living on their dead-end farms with no farmers for miles around, no doctors for miles around. Sometimes you can see all the children in a family. It seems even sometimes all the children in a town taken off in a given year. It was a hard life, and it was doomed to failure for the hill farms because of the geological history of our place. So that's the first thing to say about Frost. He doesn't want to deal with the fantasy of New England. He wants the grit. He wants the reality of this place with tides sweeping back and forth between humanity and nature. The next few lines, the house that is no more a house upon the farm that is no more a farm, and the town that is no more a town, is kind of like a riddle. It reminds me of an Anglo-Saxon riddle. What is the answer to that pattern? Or perhaps some of the riddles that Frodo used to try to stave off Gollum. How do we understand those apparent paradoxes? Well, the house that is no more a house is the old farmstead that is now marked only by a cellar hole filling in with maple seedlings. The farm is gone. All those fields cleared with such labor has been taken over. Not once, but twice in most parts of northern New England. And the towns have been disappeared. They have disappeared. They may still be on the maps in some cases. But when you look at the early maps, you can see all of the little farmsteads. None of them are visible anymore. So there's been a process of erasure. This is a value. Frost, you can tell that from his poetry, loved haunting. He loved the absence of the present and the presence of the absent because it gave him a complex view. We tend to feel that humanity's always pushing out and against nature, and often that's the case, but it's possible, and our region shows that nature can come back and repossess what it lost. Nature and humanity enfold each other. The wonderful contemporary essayist David Abram had coined a phrase, the more than human world. We're part of nature, but we're not all of it. We're a part of something that enfolds us and makes our meaning more complicated, which takes us to the last point of directive that I want to just touch on. The lines, beside the wear of iron wagon wheels, the ledges show lines rule south, east, northwest, the chisel work of an enormous glacier that braced his feet against the Arctic pole. A phrase you'll hear is sense of place. I think if you live in northern New England, there are two main factors in our sense of place. One is our dramatic seasonality. The shifts from summer to fall to winter are so vivid in the colors and also in the range of temperatures. Even in the time of climate change, this is a region where it's quite possible to experience a swing of 50 degrees in a day, you know, from 30 down to 20. And it used to be more commonly also from 20 down to 30 below. That's dramatic. I really don't know how many places in the world such swings happen. So seasonality is a big part of what we respond to. It's a big part of what Frost responds to. The other main factor, I think, in our sense of place is heavily glaciated ridges. These mountains, the White Mountains and the Greens too, were much taller before the last glacier that came through, the Wisconsin Glacier. It came down, scouring along and rounding the ridges beyond what they originally were. And then when it melted and withdrew, it left U-shaped valleys all up through the heights and lower mountains that are often, with few exceptions, not even they're forested right up to the tree line. That glaciation also is what doomed a whole generation of hill farmers. They cleared the land and wanted to get the morning sun, but in fact there wasn't enough soil to support their farms. And in some ways, this is a tragic landscape. It's a landscape where people broke their hearts and broke their backs doing incredible work of clearing with horses and oxen, which then led finally to the loss of their farms. So that's Frost's landscape history. It's austere. As I say, you might call it tragic, but there's also something hopeful in it because we can see, the proposition that we need to heal ourselves and heal nature is one I totally agree with. You can see that nature, as Robert Michael Pyle said, that's last. We have to see ourselves within a kind of tidal world in which our efforts and the lives of the things around us are interwoven. I love that he talks about the lines you can see scratched into the ledges where the glaciers went through, and then you can also see the lines of the farmers' iron wagon wheels coming through. You can read the lines in this landscape the same way you can read the lines in a poem. Now, the main poem I want to look at in depth, that was an overview of the landscape, is Spring Pools. It's a beautiful poem, and I think one where Frost's ecological insight is especially keen. I'll read it. It's a short poem, 12 lines. I thought about putting it up on the screen, but I decided I'd rather not, just because it's preferable to take in a poem by ear at first. It helps remind us that poetry is music, not just ideas. And also I wanted to have a more conversational tone flowing into our conversation, but I'll read it at the beginning and read it at the end, and then we'll get into our conversation. Spring pools. These pools that, though in forests, still reflect the total sky almost without defect, and like the flowers beside them, chill and shiver, will, like the flowers beside them, soon be gone, and yet not out by any brook or river, but up by roots to bring dark foliage on. The trees that have it in their pent-up buds to darken nature and be summer woods, let them think twice before they use their powers to blot out and drink up and sweep away these flowery waters and these watery flowers from snow that melted only yesterday. This is a poem that describes extremely clearly the reality of what we call vernal pools, which are surrounded by spring ephemerals, the flowers that bloom briefly beside these brief pools. And the vividness and the brevity of this phenomenon of the vernal pools and flowers is really powerful here. Vernal pools are a linchpin of mountain geology, mountain ecology in northern New England. They appear after the snowmelt. And one of the reasons they're ecologically crucial is that, for instance, salamanders can lay their eggs and have them hatched in these pools without danger of being eaten by fish, because since the pool is only there for a few weeks, there are never fish in vernal pools. So they're a little residue of ecological possibility. And around them, as he describes, are the flowers that are together with the pool beneath a sky, a total sky almost without defect. Now one of the things I would propose about Frost is no description is ever for simply aesthetic purposes. None is fanciful. He is a concrete, skilled observer, and the things he observes have ecological as well as thematic value. Vernal pools and spring ephemeral flowers only appear between the melting of the snow and the leafing out of the deciduous trees above them. It's in that period of some weeks. After the trees leaf out, there's not enough light in the forest floor to support much in the way of woodland wildflowers. The flowers that come then we see are along trails and in meadows. So their brevity makes them very special, and the fact that they are against a brown ground and a leafless sky gives their preciousness a kind of high definition. Now, this is something that makes them feel almost miraculous, and their disappearance can be taken as a pang. This is the way this poem, in fact, is often read, that it's a kind of lament for the brevity of beauty and perhaps also for the brevity of our lives. The end of this poem, let them think twice, these are the buds overhead, before they use their powers to blot out and drink up and sweep away these flowery waters, these watery flowers from snow that melted only yesterday. It feels like a kind of cry of the heart, a lament that closes the poem. And this is the way it's often been read by academic readers, who I think sometimes don't read so well because of spending too much time in the library. The way it's been connected often, this let them think twice, is with a line from the Provençal poet François Villon, Où sont les neiges d'antan? Where are the snows of yesteryear? The implication being gone forever. But whereas Villon was writing in response to a kind of outdoor exhibit in Paris of ice sculpture, they were going to melt and be gone forever, Frost is looking at a particular ecological scene that offers him something more hopeful than would have come with a more sentimental and simple view. Just a couple of ecological aspects to look at. These trees that have it in their pent-up buds to darken nature and be nature's woods, be summer woods. I love that phrase, pent-up buds. Another thing that speaks to our sense of place in northern New England is the out-of-syncness of winter. It's always seemed terrific to me that when winter solstice comes, the coldest weather is ahead of us, but the shortest day is already behind us. The light will be flowing into the winter as we move into January and February. Things get cold but luminous. That's something that allows us to hope. Similarly, I like knowing that at the very beginning of the winter, every leaf for the summer's forest is already in miniature within the buds. Frost has written about this effect often. His poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay. He says, Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Out of the buds of a maple, say, come all the little crisped ends of the many little leaves, and then they come out and they lie down in the sun and they broaden and they darken. So there's a sense that the millions and millions of leaves inside the buds of New England's deciduous trees are going to come out. They've been held in the buds. I love his word pent up. The Old English sense of pent is to dam something. The energy behind a dam is pent up and then it flows out and out come the leaves. That's a scary thing if you're after the beauty of the flowers on the forest floor around the vernal pools. But there are two particular ecological insights that I'd like to touch on in this poem before reading it again. The first one is Frost's acumen about how the water table works. I had the great good fortune of spending a couple of seasons hiking around and looking at vernal pools in northern New England with an ecologist named Glenn Adelson, and we ended up writing an essay about this poem called Darkness at the Edge of Spring, because Glenn, an ecologist who loves poetry, and I, a teacher of English who's drawn to botany, found in the vernal pools a kind of compression of these two ranges. And one of the ways we found it was in terms of water table. You could imagine when you see these ponds that come into the low spots along the ridgeline that the snow melted and filled them up. And similarly, you could imagine when the ponds disappeared, leaving only a kind of concave surface plastered with old last season's leaves, that they had either evaporated or flowed away through their margins. But neither of these assumptions would be true. In fact, what happens is when the snow melts, it raises the water table, which is never far below the surface, so that on the lower parts of the ground, you can see the water table. It rises up to a level that's above the lower parts of the ground, but below the higher parts around it. And when the trees put on their leaves, they suck so much water up the trunks and then respire out through the leaves that it shifts massive quantities of water and lowers the water level again down below the bottom of the vernal pools. This fact, such a concrete and specific one, is extremely interesting to Frost and to me as well. And in fact, Glenn, who is a professional scientist, looked at the scientific research and found that the knowledge of the exact dynamics of the water table was not totally understood when Frost wrote. He had an insight that came from decades of walking around and around these ponds, and now it's considered universally to be the way vernal pools originate. So that's one thing related to this poem, in which you might lament if you thought things were going away forever, but if you can see them going away within an ecological pattern, a seasonal succession, then it offers some possibility for hope. This is a poem that has 12 lines. I've been struck by the fact that Frost often writes what I would call near sonnets. He has a lot of poems with 12, 13, 15, and 16 lines, all around 14, the length of a sonnet, because he's less interested in enclosure and separateness than he is in things that circulate out or gather from larger patterns. In French, they call a 12-line poem a douzaine. It has a dozen lines, and I like to think about it here as a sonnet with the bottom two lines underground. You can't see them, but they're going to come back up again in the water table, you might say, in the poetry table. There's another thing. The other ecological pattern I'd like just to touch on is that a number of the readers, in fact, all of the readers, Glenn and I went and read all the articles that had ever been written about this poem, and they tend to assume that these flowers are annuals. They're swept away, never to be seen again. Not true. Every single one of them is a perennial. Every single one of them. They're also not narcissus, which one of the famous poet critics mentioned, since they're reflected in the water. He thought Frost must be thinking about narcissus. You can look a long way before you find a narcissus growing in the middle of the New England woods, which is to say forever, since they don't grow there. These are little things like geraniums and other familiar ephemerals. They're beautiful and they're perennials, every single one of them. They're not swept away forever. They go away for a while. I learned a verb looking at these pools, to perinate. To perinate is what perennial flowers do, and one function of this is, just as they're putting out their flower with some of their energy, they're also adding a little extra nodule of starch to the tubers below ground that will allow them to get a good running start on the next season. This sense of a world that is not gone but temporarily out of view below the ground goes along with, I think, Frost's ability to take the darkness that was part of his personality and continually reconnect it with a world that was bigger than it, that allowed him to affirm something beyond his own mortality. And in terms of a couple of phrases that came out of the workshop I went to today, the gift of close focus, looking at some of Dave Forsyth's photographs in the pollinator garden. If we can really get close focus, it also gives us the big picture and relates also to the theme of Doug's talk, the theme of the values of connection. In Frost, the dread, the fear of mortality, his own unruly emotions are a big part of his poetry, but it's constantly held in check by doing his morning work, by such experiences of close focus. It gives him what the Renaissance artists called chiaroscuro, the mixture of light and dark, dappled shade and light, that makes forms rounded, and that let his own life too feel rounded and meaningful beyond its immediate personal limitations. I'm going to stop there. That's my 25 minutes, and I am very eager to hear if anybody has comments or questions. This is the part I most look forward to. Thank you.
John, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm going to help moderate questions, but I'm hoping, yes. So Mark has put this up. I'm going to start with a question of my own. In addition to the poems that you shared with us by Frost, which are, not sort of the greatest hits that we're all so familiar with, do you have any other poetry that you might recommend for folks in this meeting who might be interested in using words and meditation on nature to try to feel better and feel more connected right now?
So Hope, you mean not simply poems by Frost, but other poets as well?
Either or, yeah. Yep.
If I had a little more time, the next poem by Frost I would have gone to is called "The Need of Being Versed in Country Things." It's a poem that is often taken to mean we're mistaken to find human meanings in poetry, but in fact I think Frost is a complex fellow, and he finds it a mistake to search for specifically and exclusively human meaning, but in other ways he finds nature extremely meaningful and in fact essential. But two other poets who are very meaningful to many. One is Gary Snyder, and Snyder takes a kind of very broad mountain scale and long time scale vision of geology and plate tectonics, and also of ancient cultures, indigenous cultures of North America and of Asia. He's been very helpful to me. I love him. And another one who died just fairly recently was Mary Oliver, who is another New England poet and a great watcher of nature. One who has ecological insights of her own. One of her most famous poems is called "The Summer's Day," and it ends, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? But in the middle of it, she looks a grasshopper in the face, and she notices that its jaws go sideways instead of up and down. That's the kind of observation that Frost is good at. By the way, I saw somebody said, and I had promised I'd do this and I didn't do it, asked if I would read that last poem aloud again. Let me do that again. I appreciate that response because I did want to come back around to it. So let me read that and then see if there are other questions. This is Spring Pools, the one that I was just talking about vernal pools and spring ephemerals. These pools that, though in forests, still reflect the total sky almost without defect, and like the flowers beside them, chill and shiver, will, like the flowers beside them, soon be gone, and yet not out by any brook or river, but up by roots to bring dark foliage on. The trees that have it in their pent-up buds to darken nature and be summer woods, let them think twice before they use their powers to blot out and drink up and sweep away these watery sorry, I'm botching it, these flowery waters and these watery flowers from snow that melted only yesterday. Thanks for that prompt.
Thank you for reading that poem again. Hoping for some other questions from the group here, but
I could ask one. It's Charlie.
thank you, Charlie.
What age was Frost when he wrote that poem? And I ask because I'm not an expert on Frost by any means, but I've enjoyed his earlier stage of life poetry more so than his later in life.
Well, yes.
I'm curious as to what period it was written.
I'm going to give you the exact date, Charlie. It's about in the middle.
Okay.
Let's see here. 41. Brook. 1928. So about in the middle of his career. He died in 63. But you know what you say about his early poems, I agree with you that his first two poems, A Boy's Will and North of Boston, just contain so many great poems. They're wonderful. And the very, very last poems he wrote can sometimes get a little chatty and doggerel, in my opinion. Although here's something you might like to know about Frost. Frost did write very great poems very late in his life. And as I say, in 1947, almost 20 years after this one, is when he wrote Directive, which is one of his very greatest poems for me. But Frost was very aware of his reputation. And one thing that a recent biographer found was he took some of his best poems, put them in a drawer, and kept them for 30 years, and then put them out in some of his last volumes. So, for instance, a poem like The Draft Horse, which is a very strong poem, and I think it might have come in his very last collection. People thought, wow, he really uncorked one there. Well, he uncorked it a couple of decades early and saved it just for that occasion. So, but like you, I'm a lover of Frost's early poems. So they're just so wonderful. Yeah.
Looking for another question, but I have one myself. I'm wondering, John, if you could talk about, Diana has a question. So if you want to look over in the chat, we have one.
I see it there. Yeah. So Diana asks, can you remind us of what he meant regarding the Earth's taking over of human interference and other places he may have referred to that in his poetry? Yeah. So Frost, in all the places where he had farms, bought beautiful scenic farms, one right next to us in Ripton, Vermont, and I know there are several beauties in New Hampshire, that were once in the middle of thriving farming communities, which are, even by the time he moved to them in the early 20th century, were on the way out. Frost lived at the time when the great reforestation of northern New England was taking place. And our forests today and our wildlife are so much more extensive than during his life in New England. It's an interesting thing. We tend to think that I grew up through college out in the West, where it seems that things only move in one direction. Human interference with nature is always pushing farther and farther up into the mountains. That's one of the reasons there's so many forest fires now, there are a lot of homes that are not in suitable places, given natural fire dynamics. But in New England, what you see is a sweeping back. We've had two great deforestations in northern New England. One in the very, very beginning of the 19th century, when It was probably the most rapacious deforestation outside of Oregon and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan that this continent ever knew. And then back came the trees. We didn't plant them; they just came back. And then we cut those down again. The second forest had a lot of pines in it, just in time for us to cut them down and use them for the box mills of New Hampshire and Massachusetts that were selling our new industrial products. And then we cut those down, and along came the third forest. So this is a place where nature pushes back. We're very good here at growing trees, or I should say the trees are very good here at growing back. And it's an unusual landscape. As I say, Frost liked haunted things. He liked walking to the sites of old vanished farms. That's really what the poem Directive is about. And it's oddly encouraging, I think, to him. You know, that we think that people have all the power. We do have tremendous destructive power, and I'm absolutely focused on climate change and other related matters. But the fact is, human beings will not have the last word. Gary Snyder is also clear about that if we have a large enough time frame, we can see that we're phenomena in the middle of a larger succession. So I think that's what he meant.
Thank you, John. Would you share how nature informs the writing that you do? Because you write poetry and prose. Do you have like a morning routine like Frost did, or something that is a ritual that connects you with nature to help you with your writing?
Yes, I'd be glad to talk about that. In fact, let me put that in one holding things. I just saw a question from Doug that speaks directly to this.
Oh, good.
This last one that I was just responding to, and then I'm going to come back exactly to what you just asked. Doug had written, is Frost as sensitive to Northeast agriculture as Wendell Berry is to Middle America? Were they similarly celebratory about agriculture? And I should have mentioned Wendell Berry is another of our ecologically attuned poets today. And I think the answer is he was very sensitive and knowledgeable about Northeast agriculture. My sense is he wasn't as good a farmer as Wendell Berry. His grandfather, who kind of bankrolled Frost at one of the New Hampshire farms, insisted that he try to do some honest work in addition to writing poetry. But his neighbors there made a lot of fun of Frost. They said he was the worst farmer they'd ever seen. He was a chicken farmer, largely. And he didn't stay at it longer than he had to. But the other thing about Frost is, I do think that Frost liked living in a place with a failing agricultural economy. He loved the vestiges of the old ways, and he loved that haunted interweaving of human and natural victories and defeats. He loved that. I think Berry is a celebrant of community and farming to a degree that Frost was not. That's my impression. But going back now to Hope's question, yes, I do find that I do a version of Frost's and Thoreau's morning work. I love to keep a journal, and in the journal I like to draw, and to again, that phrase from the workshop I attended, the gift of close focus. I like to draw and look and count, and in my journal entries talk about the weather and the temperature and what I hear and what's growing around me. And I like to think about the relationship between what's around me and what led to it. So you look at the dark blue berry of a clintonia, and you think about the little yellow lily that preceded it. So then this is very Frost-like. You see the berry in the flower, you see the flower in the berry. You see the farm that's gone in the cellar hole, and you see the pretty big maple growing up right out of the cellar hole in terms of moving toward a kind of forested future. I found that for me, journaling has been the heart of writing, and in fact, I wrote a book on Directive, just on the one poem, in which I had, as I said, my wife and I came from the West, but we came east for grad school, and then I wanted to teach at a liberal arts college, and there was a job at Middlebury College, which really thrilled me to get, and I taught here for a few years, and then we were going to go back west, but by that time we'd fallen in love with New England, and nothing could have taken us out of our new home here in Vermont. And so at that point, once we made the decision that we would stay, and that was, pretty early on, it was about 45 years ago, I wanted to really get to know my new home place. And so I bought all the field guides and began hiking all over the mountains. And what I discovered was, as I hiked in the mountains, I realized that Frost had looked at everything I was looking at and had written about it with great insight, and that his poems, in fact, mapped these mountains for me. So the journaling related to botanizing and looking at the geological remnants and looking at the forest history, for me became one thing with reading this poet whom we're so blessed to have in our midst, a poet of great imaginative gifts as well as I've wanted to suggest here, of great scientific insights.
Well, thanks. That's a wonderful way to end our session with you and our question and answer. What incredible presentation. Thanks very much,
Thank you,
John, for being with us today.
All the best to you and your wonderful work at New Hampshire Audubon. Bye-bye.
So much, John, and thank you to everyone for joining this annual meeting. I felt like, despite the requirement to do this via Zoom, this went pretty well. And Mark Nutter on our staff, Diana Smith on our staff, and Hope Jordan on our staff deserve a huge round of applause for the technology side of this. Thank you so much. We will be sharing some more information with you all for some of the things that may have been hard to see on the slides. And we're so excited to share some of our successes and some of our future hopes and dreams for this current fiscal year. I'm going to close the annual meeting officially, but please join Becky Swamla and anyone who would like to stay on for a little while longer if you just want to touch base via Zoom. Our Zoom is open for another half an hour or so, and Becky Swamla, who many of you know, has agreed to lead the post-meeting mingle. But for me and on behalf of the staff and on behalf of our board of directors, thank you so much for being part of our annual meeting today and for celebrating nature with all of us. Have a great fall, and we will see you in person as soon as possible. Again, stay on Zoom if you like. Take care all.